You are listening to Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. Pursuing.
They're saying no.
I saw it.
Audio
I'm got
on
it.
The stream.
I got it. Go. You're good.
So I'm Kurt. Kurt Potts, because there's a lot of Kurts in this community. I've been around for a long time. I don't know, over 10 years or so. And about me, I write role-playing games. I wrote Sigils in the Dark, and I co-authored Lighthearted with my wife. And I'm currently running a stream of Lighthearted on the Happy Jacks Network.
Excellent. And just for the people who will end up watching the video, I'll just go around the room again real quick. My name is Stu.
This is Tappy.
This is Seven Metal Jess or Jessica.
And then I'm Kurt.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I think I want to call you HMJ.
That works.
All right.
Like CNR.
Yeah. Right.
Where is he? It's the wrong page. All right. In this episode of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast, Joel from Missouri says that intelligence is not a stat, and I agree with him. Yuri from On the Shoulders of Giants podcast defends published adventures, and Toby from Atlanta asks why initiative is a thing. But first, if you'd like to email us, you can email us at happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. That's happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. We have a forum, happyjacksforum.com. That's happyjacksforum.com, and we're on all of the social meteors. We're on the Twitters and the Instagrams and the Facebooks and the MeWe's, Happy Jacks RPG, all one word. If you would like to watch the show live, you can go to happyjacks.org/live, and you can watch us do the show at 7:06 p.m. Pacific time every Friday night. Well, since we have two brand new people, the tradition is to have the brand new people read emails first. So who would like to read Intelligence is Not a Stat from Joel in Missouri?
I can do that one.
Okay.
All right. Intelligence is not a stat from Joel in Missouri. Hello, Jackers of the Happy. I write this in response to Happy Jacks 2707. The email about intelligent players playing dumb characters and vice versa. I present a fifth choice for your consideration. 5. Full general intelligence is not a statistic. The number on your character sheet that has int next to it represents some set of abilities that the character can perform, including spell properties for wizards, but it does not include solving the puzzles in this RPG. Think about Rain Man or A Beautiful Mind, Tom Clancy stories, and the set of the best professors of philosophy, math, biology, and sociology. Do all those have intelligence? And do you actually believe that they would all solve your RPG puzzles with the same relative ease as to match your assessment of their relative int score? No, that's crazy talk. The int stat is the character's base statistic for the skills and abilities that use that stat. It does not cover problem solving. The playing the game set of abilities is not covered by any of the stats on the character sheet. So in the case of the players playing characters with opposite intelligence scores, the player who thinks of how to solve the puzzle is more than free to present the solution. Of course, ideally, they will present it in a way that matches their idea of their character. And if that player is committed to their character, standing at attention in a stupor whenever they are not engaged in combat, I guess that's sort of a character choice, but I think not a very good one. Interested to hear what you all think. Thanks for the podcast, Joel from Missouri. P.S. This space deliberately left blank.
That's my favorite kind of P.S. All right. Okay. Thoughts?
I have some.
Go.
I do not agree. And what I think he's talking about here when he's talking about professors of philosophy and mathematics and all that stuff is that knowledge is not intelligence, which I do agree with. I think that you can have somebody who does not process well, does not problem solve well, can memorize a whole bunch of stuff and gain knowledge and gain expertise on with that knowledge and become a doctor very high in what they do. So it's not necessarily intelligence for having a degree. But if you think about, like, if you've ever done an escape room, escape rooms require zero knowledge. That is a very important part of it. You don't need to know anything in order to solve all of the puzzles. What you have to do is be very curious and try and find places and try and match things with like things and try and look around and basically, solve puzzle after puzzle after puzzle. That not requiring knowledge, I think that sort of thing, like putting 1 and 2 together very quickly, that very much is intelligence. So if you're like in an escape room, you can well, there is some knowledge because you can learn strategies to do it better. Like, don't work on the same puzzle with the same person, etc. But the people who tend to figure out the puzzles faster tend to do it more consistently, and people who don't do that consistently, you could look at those people of having just like that lower processing speed or not being able to put those concepts together, which is kind of like what I think of when I think of intelligence, as opposed to a professor of biology.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, especially because in role-playing games in general, all stats are a super generalization of a skill. Like, your dex skill could mean that you're good at dancing and shooting arrows, but that's not how real life works either, right? So having an int score that starts off with like your general ability to have a certain level of intelligence, and then having skills or abilities or something along those lines, which a lot of systems have, where you pair up a skill and an attribute kind of go together, says, okay, I'm extra good at investigation or I'm extra knowledgeable about magic. And that's kind of where you differentiate where that intelligence kind of sticks. But I agree, it's totally that.
I think it can differ depending on the game that you're playing, right? Like, if we're all sitting down to play D&D and the stats are your character, I mean, I don't have to bench press to, lift the gates. So int should be able to, like, help me solve the puzzle because I'm playing a person with an 18 int. They would be able to solve this puzzle, right? I should be able to ask, hey, can I get a clue? Can I do this? Like, the stat should be able to inform that. But then there's a certain style of role-playing where player intelligence is the main thing in the game. Like, if you're doing the OSR or you playing old school D&D, like, the stats on the sheet are for the abilities, and then really you're just the players trying to beat a GM or solve their puzzles or figure out this dungeon, and with whatever the resources you were allowed to bring with you. And so in that case, I think that I agree with Stu that the puzzle was placed there for the players to solve as a player exercise, like a player level thing. But it really depends on the type of game that you're trying to play.
I think when I read this email, I kicked myself because when I made Moment of Truth, there is no intelligence stat. And I specifically didn't put an intelligence stat in there, kind of for this reason. I put in perception instead. And I didn't, and really all I did is just kind of rename it so that it would refocus it, because it's more about perceiving things and making connections with things than it is about just a very general intelligence stat. Because while I generally agree, I think if you're giving clues or if you have some way that you can reward players who've spent points on intelligence to help them get through a puzzle or something like that, that's fine. But I mean, the concept of I'm gonna roll my solve puzzle skill, or which was what intelligence could end up becoming. I got a 10. Is that good enough? You know what I mean? And it's like at some point you're sitting around the table just rolling dice all day long, and I think that is one. I mean, it is an aspect. It is an aspect of a role-playing game. I think for the players, and it has a long-standing tradition to have been the GM doesn't come up with the puzzles for the characters. The GM comes up with the puzzles for the players. Because characters don't give a shit. They're just a freaking piece of paper with a bunch of numbers on it. But they're doing it to challenge the players. So, but I don't mind having a mechanic that can make it easier, but to solve it entirely, I would be like, no, I'm out.
Well, I would also like to say that I think sometimes in games the concept of the intelligence stat is abused by the combination of that and knowledge, because people who are smart with the same amount of knowledge don't have any more knowledge. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like if you got an 18 intelligence plus 2 like in your solve puzzle skills, you still have a 2 in your solve puzzle skills, even if somebody like has a lower intelligence. So just because like you're good at putting two things together, like figuring things out, doesn't mean you're any better at fixing a car.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Trying to figure out what's wrong with the car, you could make an argument for. But so many times, like, the actual doing of some type of skill has to do with that intelligence. And that doesn't really make that much sense. So I can see where somebody is coming from, to that degree.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But again, how much of a stimulation do you want?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if you want, I have a whole shelf of second edition books where you can pick from like 300 pages of non-weapon proficiencies. You could have court proceedings or origami or oration. You can be super knowledgeable about anything you want.
It's like Rifts, where you can have a recycling skill.
Exactly.
You gotta save the planet.
Or GURPS, where there's an accounting skill. And
Yeah.
hundreds of others. Those always make very
You can
rounded
get
out.
really nitty gritty, and if that's the game you want to play, go for it. There's lots of systems that build it that way. But I think in games where they don't have skills and it's just attributes, they're specifically trying to generalize it to make the number parts a little smoother. And they tend to be more story heavy games where if your character doesn't know anything about puzzle solving, then you should probably play it out story wise and keep it all narration and not numbers anyway.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was in the late 80s when people really got a giant hard-on for like as many things as humanly possible. Like I have a Traveler edition where they have rules for sailboats. And like where the wind is and how close you can point to it and the different boats you can okay, well you got a square rig here. It's like this is I've got a spaceship. Why am I
That edition happened in first edition Traveler in the small little black books. I don't remember which book it was, but I remember they made a big deal about it because we're going to give you a career path for what they called the wet navy, which was navy with boats rather than starships, and that was probably 81 or 82. It was early. That was really early. Yeah, and Traveler is one of those games that had a lot of skills.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not as many as GURPS,
Yep.
but it still had a lot of skills back then. And then GURPS, when GURPS get released, 82, 83, I think. And GURPS, it has way more now. It probably has 5 times as many in 4th edition as it did in 1st edition. But it had a lot. It still had a lot of skills. And you could
Yep.
make an accountant if you wanted. No one ever did.
I think something that could be interesting is viewing it through the lens of where does your character's authority lie? Like if you're the wizard and this is a magic puzzle, you probably have better insight. Like that goes back to what Tappy was saying about your knowledge base. So if it's something from your background, like why is this farm's crops not growing? Well, maybe the barbarian who has the farmer background would know better than the person with the 18 intelligence because that's what they did for their whole life.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
I definitely like using it as a perception thing. Like what patterns do you recognize? What things do you pick up that others wouldn't? And then use the background as a lens to view those stats.
I like that a lot. Kind of like you have your background as farmer, so you have farmer skill.
Yeah.
That doesn't have any numbers to it, but that's like you should be able to do these things. And skills that apply to that, therefore automatically apply or definitely apply to it. And if you don't have that, like you're a wizard from the city, boy, does it not matter how smart you are. You can certainly tell that those are plants. You might even be able to tell some plants are dying.
But you can't tell if it's from Brondo or not.
Yeah, right?
It's got what plants crave. It's got electrolytes. Yeah, I think that, like, what in Moment of Truth, the perception stat, you have to pair it with a skill. So that's gonna that stat by itself isn't the determinant factor, because if you're a warrior and you're trying to assess how skilled someone is at sword fighting, you're going to add whatever your melee skill is to your perception, and that's the roll you're going to make. So it really kind of diffuses, because uber stats are bullshit. And I tried to not let intelligence be an uber stat. So, anything else on this one? We can move on to the second one. Going once? Going twice? All right. Sold. In defense of published adventures from Yuri, from the On the Shoulders of Dwarves podcast. Now, I got this email months ago. I hope you guys are still going, because if you've podvated by now, you sent the email.
Hopefully not.
Right.
I haven't heard of this one.
I'll look it up while you read, Jess, if you will.
Okay.
Jess or Jessica, which do you prefer?
Whichever.
Okay.
I feel like normally Jessica, but having chosen Heavy Metal Jess as my online presence, now I just have to accept Jess as the inevitable.
Okay, Jessica.
Just call you Metal.
Yeah, that's preferable. All right. Hi, guys. Great podcast. And I hope mine, On the Shoulders of Dwarves, will last as long as you guys have been running. Keep up the good work. I've been listening to your 2,618 episodes, which is so many.
It's not really that
on
many.
modules. And I agree with many of the things you said, especially since as a professional improviser, I believe that being able to change things to adapt to your player's focus is one of the most important tools for GMs. However, in my eyes, there's two reasons why published adventures are important, and those are inspiration and education. New GMs are not created with the knowledge of how to run a game or invent a plot, and some of the best adventures are published to show people what can be done with an RPG game or to show how to run a horror or tragedy adventure. When I wrote the adventure Rolling with Laughter, I tried to create a guide for GMs to run comedy adventures. And that's a major part of the purpose of published adventures for me.
Thoughts?
It's a guy who publishes modules defending modules.
Okay, hold on. You got to look at his album artwork for the podcast. It is dwarves.podiant, podiant.com. Looks like they're still going because they put out an episode on August 2nd. But you got to look at their album art, because it reminds me of you and I trying to staple the roof onto the old hooch at the fair. Are you seeing it?
No.
Nice.
That's good.
It's pretty funny. Yeah, it's a guy in socks standing on the shoulders of another dude.
Oh yeah, that is exactly how we did that.
Right. It's just I saw that, I'm like, yeah, I remember those days. That was a bad idea. Now he brings up a point.
Oh yeah, no, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and that was my expression at the time too.
Yes, it was. That was back when I weighed like 130 pounds.
Right. Now he does bring up a point that I had not considered about published adventures, and that is for new GMs. And I do think that is a very valuable resource, especially when you're just starting out. Because I mean, the first adventure I ever ran was the sample dungeon in the D&D Red Box, which I don't even remember anymore. But it was just a simple dungeon. You go from room to room. There's some moldering stuff on the ground, and it's like, oh, it might be a mummy or something, and And it was a lot of fun. But I mean, without that very first sample dungeon, we wouldn't have known what to do. Once we've read the rules, especially reading Gygax, we wouldn't have had any idea.
I mean, I definitely agree with that. Like, early adventures can be just as important as having the core book for a GM that's just starting out. I wish that more. I don't know if this person's modules are written this way, but I wish they were written as more like informative, and you could do, here are options for you, as opposed to, here is the plot. Your players are going to go from here to here, and this is what they're going to experience. Because that also can set people up for that style of role-playing, where everything's already set in stone, and they're just basically reading the book that their GM set up for them. So, yes, they are useful. Even bad ones are useful for early GMs, but if they are supposed to be for teaching or for information purposes, they should be written that way.
Agreed. I think I made this comment on the YouTube video, which I'm sure everybody goes to YouTube and reads all the comments that people put on the videos. But to me, published adventures are kind of like a rotisserie chicken, where if you're not a very good cook, you can go buy a rotisserie chicken and bring it home and put some rice with it, and you have a dinner. And that can be like how you run your game. Or if you're a more experienced cook, you can go buy a rotisserie chicken, take it home, rip it apart, use some of it for one thing, stick the carcass in a crock pot and make some stock, and then use that for another thing. And you get different things out of it than a less experienced cook. So to me, modules are like that. I hate making maps, so I get them just for the map, especially in the days before Reddit when you could just go search up a map. So they also tell you kind of a little bit on how to prepare for your game, I think, in the early stages when you're not like, no one's shown you, especially if you're like that DM that like didn't have anybody to show you how to run a game and you just had to figure it out. They were really useful in that circumstance.
Yeah, I probably, when I played D&D, I probably owned 10 or 12 modules, and I used to steal stuff out of them all the time. There would be like some sort of, it would be like some sort of encounter or something that I thought was kind of interesting, or a puzzle or something, and I'd lift that section out and put it in whatever it is I was running. Of course, back then I was like, I want to make the biggest dungeon ever. It's got 100 levels, and each, and oh my God, the amount of graph paper I went through in the late 70s was stupid.
That's awesome. I've used modules for different reasons. I think I hate running modules because I will not remember it. Like,
Right.
I can read it front to back, but I'm not going to remember that this NPC needs to like foreshadow some shit for later. So that's ruined. Like, I just have to roll with the fact that that's never happening. But the times that I found them really useful was when I first got Dresden Files Fate, because I had never run a mystery before. And so I wasn't really sure, like I'd done D&D and stuff like that, but then I got a hold of Dresden Files. I was like, oh, how do I run like a magical mystery game? And so I grabbed every single adventure they had and I read them all. And I did the rotisserie chicken thing, right? Like I was like, oh, well, I can use some of this meat, and then just rewrote it into the way that I knew I could, provide the end and it would be okay. But it was definitely that learning experience. So I buy that. As they should be, there should at least be one in the back of the book to show me how do you want me to run this game. I may not do it, but like it's nice that you put it there.
Yeah, I agree, and that's but we've been doing it for so long. Forget what it was like when we very first started, especially before there was an internet and you didn't have videos you could watch people playing games, and you literally had no idea how other people were playing games. So
as the only one here who started role playing with the internet, I don't know what that's.
Oh wow!
My first game was 4th edition D&D right after it came out, and I went and looked up every single podcast I could find to learn how to role play, and I that's how I found this podcast.
That's like 2008, 2007, something like that. Right. That's just
it was December of 2008 was the first time I played D&D.
Okay. That's around the time I bought my 4th edition books. Because I
think I found y'all like 4 months after that or something like that.
It would have been in July. That's when we did the first episode.
So then it was later in the year. Yeah. But
yeah, see, I came at role-playing games from from free-form role-play chat rooms where there's no rules and there's no stats, there's nothing. It's just unstructured writing exercise. And so my sessions of D&D are pretty much not like anybody else's sessions of D&D because I didn't have any of that background knowledge. Like, I didn't know what a dungeon run was, so none of my games have ever had that. People get real confused.
Well, yeah, if you ask Jim, when I was like 12, the GM, like the second GM for any other game I ever played, is one of the best GMs I've ever met. And he ran most of the games that Jim and I played when we were when I was in high school. And so, I never really I didn't run a game for a long time. I only played because this guy was so good at playing, had an eidetic memory for dozens and dozens of books. Like, he knew all of BattleTech. He just knew it. And he didn't study. It wasn't. He had a bunch of other hobbies and other things. He just knew it, and he just knew all of it. And so he ran our games, and they were awesome. They were story driven. They were character driven, and we never had dungeon crawls. We never had modules or anything like that. He was a GM savant. And so I was really lucky for that, but I also didn't actually run a game, I think, for 8 or 9 years, because why would you? And now I like running games even more than I like playing.
Yeah. It's a lot more fun, I think.
I think one of my favorite anecdotes of playing through a module, one of our buddies decided, his son decided, I'm going to run Dad and his friends through a Pathfinder module. And he read the text cold, just read it out loud at us. To the point where he read into the secret stuff. He was like, and then in the bottom of the cistern, there is a health potion. He was just going, oh, damn. It was so good. Because then all of us had to, not laugh at him and then play through this dungeon as if we didn't know there was a health potion in the bottom of the well, has anyone checked this? Should we maybe? It was a good time.
That's fantastic.
That sounds like a good sketch.
Yeah.
All right. Who was it from? From Yuri. Thank you, Yuri. And good luck on your podcast. And it's I'll try to remember to put a link in the show notes, because sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Dwarves.podiant, PODIANT.co, and that's on the Shoulders of Dwarves, a weekly podcast about role-playing games. Oh, it's not weekly. No, because you came out on August 2nd, and now it's August 21st. You're slacking. You owe us 2 more episodes. Come on. Schedule's a promise. All right.
I want to say real quick for running comedy adventures and stuff is that one of the worst games I ever played was our GM was a aspiring comedian, and it was terrible because comedians are professionally witty.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so he was professionally witty at us for 6 hours. So anything you could say, everybody was faster than you. The dumbest guard was faster than, and he also really liked more of the player knowledge and skills rather than rolling your dice. So, the Charisma 17 bard was just getting his ass handed to him by, some dumbass guard trying to fast talk him because, professionally witty.
Right. Have you ever seen the what was it? I think it was on Showtime. I'm Dying Up Here. It was a series. I think they did 2 seasons, one or 2 seasons, and I think Jim Carrey was the producer. But it's about the Comedy Store, but it's not called the Comedy Store, and it's supposed to be Mitzi Shore, Pauly Shore's mother, but it's not really Mitzi Shore. But they basically sort of recreated this show that sort of tells what it was like in sort of the early days in the 70s of the stand-up comedian world in L.A. And the writing on that show was so goddamn sharp. It was amazing. Because they'd just all be sitting around drinking in a bar or eating French fries in a diner or something like that. And they're just boom, 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 just giving each other horrible amounts of shit as quick as they possibly could, piling on top of each other as fast as they could. It was amazing to watch. And I can't imagine being in a room like that. That would piss me off.
That's kind of what this was like.
Then that's when you say something like, you want to do combat that way too? Problem solved.
There you go.
Well, now we're back to is int a stat?
It actually segues perfectly into the third email. Why is initiative a thing? From Toby in Atlanta. Do you want to read this chapter or do you want me to read it?
I'll read it.
All right.
Hi, Happy Jacks. I have recently come to the conclusion that initiative in RPGs only matters to the players, and really not even then. I've played a ton of different games, and have finally decided that I don't care what orders the players take their turn in combat, nor do I care what order their enemies take their turn in combat. Even in D&D, it almost always ends up looking like fast players go, then monsters, then the players, then the monsters, then the players ad infinitum. So why do we even have initiative anymore anyway? It's a waste of everyone's time. Just let the players go, then have their opponents go, or something. Anything is better than having every player roll their initiative, figure out their bonus, add the numbers up, tell the GM, have the GM sort the list. Sure, there are ways to speed it up, but why? It never matters. Thoughts? Toby in Atlanta.
It depends on the game you're playing.
100%.
Yeah, if you're playing first edition L5R, initiative is hyper important.
Traveler.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Even in D&D, it can be really important. I mean, we all know the hedge mage story.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That would have, if the initiative order had happened differently, that would have been a reasonably interesting combat rather than a one-shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you, certain games, if you strip initiative out of them, you are punishing players on their build, which is really important to certain types of players. So you have to be really careful that you don't have someone in your game that has specifically targeted, like, I'm the fast character. I'm the one who always gets the jump on people. If you take initiative out, then they're kind of missing out unless you just say, I'm always going to let you go first.
Yeah. Very specifically, Cyberpunk 2020 has the solo, who has a special ability that just adds to initiative. Like, you're not any better with guns or anything. You're going to go first unless there's another solo, and then it's kind of up for grabs. But combat is so deadly in there. If you can one-shot pretty much anybody, unless you hit armor, you want, like, going first is the most important thing.
Right.
We lose a lot of, like, in actual fighting. There are other things like feinting and trying to get a read on people and stuff that we don't do in this because it's boring. We just, do a swing and assume other stuff is happening within that for you to actually hit.
GURPS says that.
Yeah.
Well, no,
I mean, you could do
you
that.
can do feints and stuff, but if you feint,
yeah.
Feinting is usually bad because if you feint, you're not killing somebody. If you're not killing somebody, they kill you.
Well,
so it's oftentimes a bad idea if you look at how combat works.
I'll tell you when the few times it ended up getting used is when we had games where the character point levels got very high, and it got real. If you had two characters who were both really good with their swords, they couldn't get a hit through on the other one's defenses. That's when someone reached for the book and said, there's feint rules in here somewhere. That's the first time we ever used them. Because literally, we were going to sit there for hours rolling dice back and forth, and no one was going to land a hit. The moment someone landed a hit, that fight would have been over. I mean, it would have been over within a round or two. But without someone doing at least a little bit of damage in the beginning, it was going to last forever.
I think too, if you really hate the way certain games build initiative, there's lots of really good options. Like the Angry DM has a really cool thing called Popcorn Initiative, where someone gets to go first. You guys kind of decide who that is, whether it's from the story deciding who goes first, or your person with the highest initiative goes first, and then they pass it to somebody. So your rogue goes through and says, I'm going to sneak attack, and then I'm going to pass it to the wizard, or then I'm going to pass it to the cleric, or then I'm going to let the monsters go, and then we'll go after them. And it's kind of this back and forth. So if you don't want to roll, you can do it that way. I've done it. It gets a little chaotic, and people usually aren't ready with the turns, so then you've got to kind of deal with that other problem.
Yeah. Apocalypse World does it exactly the way he describes.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I mean, there are games that do that too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, any game that adds the NPCs or the bad stuff to as a consequence of your roll, it doesn't matter what initiative happens, because if you roll bad stuff's going to happen. It doesn't matter who goes first. So, like with the Hedge Mage, first miss would have been a fireball. Like, that's how it would have happened in any PBTA game. So they wouldn't have been able to be, murdered before they got to go.
See, but he was no mere hedge mage. Why do we keep calling it the hedge mage? He said so. He specifically said it. He said, I am no mere hedge mage. And then he was agreeing.
Back in my day, we rolled initiative every single round. You didn't even do it just once per combat. You did it every round because chaos.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually like that idea. I mean, it slows the game down, but I think that does give it more of that unpredictability. I think I would prefer that.
Mm-hmm. That's how Savage Worlds does with the cards. Every turn you're getting different cards.
Oh, that's
and the
true,
way you adjust that is by getting more or less cards.
You could also do an initial initiative and then roll a modifier die to that initiative one up or down. And then that modifier you can roll up or down and stuff like that. So if you're unlucky, you could start really high and just kind of march your way down, or vice versa. That'd be kind of fun.
It would be.
My buddy Dan Phipps, who's from Gemrune Games, who wrote High Magical Lives, his quote about initiative is that it's rocket fuel. The more rocket fuel you add to the rocket, the more rocket fuel you'll need because it has weight. And so the more complex your initiative system gets, the more time it takes up. But also, to make it interesting, you have to add more initiative system. So by the time that it is interesting enough to be relevant in the game, it is no longer functional or useful to you. And so it's this like weird balance problem. And so his thought is just chuck the whole thing.
Fuck going to the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't. I mean, I prefer games that have short combat that resolves quickly. So for me, if you don't have an initiative system, then however you do it, maybe whoever's got the highest dex goes first, or whatever it is. That's a system anyway as well. But whoever's going to go first is going to win because they're going to take someone out, or they're going to cripple one of the other guys. And assuming you had a balanced encounter, somewhat right off the bat, they're going to be in a disadvantage as soon as whoever loses that initiative. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I think the more gamey the combat is, the more like whereas like in D&D you have your board game phase and then you have your role playing phase, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the more it is like a board game, the more cool stuff you should have in it, like things like initiative and moving around and stuff like that. Whereas if it's very much not like a board game, you should just finish that bit very quickly so you can go back to what you really want to do, which is a role-playing game. But that's not to say that the board game isn't fun. People play board games for hours and hours and hours at huge board game conventions, etc. So it's not bad to have a very game-like combat system, which is quite complex, as long as it's still fun, as long as you don't use too much rocket fuel.
Mm-hmm.
It just sounds like this guy is really over that board game part of the game and wants to get to a different game, which means you'd probably play something other than D&D.
Well, see, I was actually thinking the opposite. Because D&D at high levels, it's an attrition game, right? It really doesn't...
Yeah, like World War I.
It really doesn't matter who goes first. You know, a single round of combat, and when you're talking, you know, 70, 100 hit points. I don't know what 5th edition did, but I mean, 4th edition got ridiculous. 1,800, 2,500 hit points. When you start getting into that level, it really doesn't matter where the round robin started, because it's going to take numerous rounds of lucky rolls to be able to gain an advantage. So where you started in that circus, I don't think it would matter. Now at lower levels, obviously it does.
Well, that's what I'm saying is don't play that game.
Right.
Just don't play it. Play a different game that does combat differently.
Yeah. Lancer does an interesting. It's almost popcorn initiative. It's just the players always go first. You pick one player, and then it just splits back and forth between the GM picking a bad guy and the players picking one of them to go, and you just cycle. So like one player goes first, and then you just back and forth the rest of the time.
That's well, there's a hierarchy in Vampire 5th edition, and it's like vampires go before people, PCs go before NPCs, and there's like a hierarchy if it really matters, which
right.
I think it does, even in that game. I mean, there's not a lot of one shots unless it's a vampire going up against a mortal. Right,
and in that point, you're rolling to feed, aren't you? It's not really a fight.
It depends. Depends how well armed the mortal is. Because in my game, they're going up against the Second Inquisition, so they're all like, they're dealing with special ops retirees who are using incendiary rounds with incendiary or guns with incendiary rounds in them. And in fact, they just in the last session, did I put it up yet? I don't know if I'm spoiling anything. They fucking knocked down my AC 130.
Oh, whoa. Nice.
Fuckers. I was like, damn it! That was my one ace in the hole was a freaking gunship.
Tear somebody literally apart with bullets.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You can't kill him with bullets. Not trying to kill him.
Right. I mean, I spent. I don't know. I held it. I had that ace in the hole. I'm like, I'm gonna wait until the Second Inquisition needs this. And I'm like, okay, things are getting bad because now the party's in pursuit of a couple of the operatives. Oh, right, okay, you hear that flying overhead, because someone had like enhanced perception or something. They turned the Auspex thing on, and I think Jim sent because he ghouled all the Pasadena parrots. And he just sent them up into the sky. He's like, I'm going to lose that fabulous resource to be able to spy on anyone anywhere in Southern California, but we got to get rid of that thing. Yeah, I was bummed.
Well, see, for reasons like that, it's really important to have initiative.
Right, it is. It is.
All right, so the parrots go first.
Insanity's going to happen.
I don't know if the AC-130 could do anything about a flock of parrots. Especially if it's
Flock of Parrots is my favorite 90s band.
They're like Flock of Seagulls, but had more color. Better haircuts.
From Miami.
Were they? Oh, that's right. What is it with? What's that guy's name? The guy that did Margaritaville.
I have no idea.
Jimmy Buffett?
Jimmy Buffett. What is it with... Because I've only been to Orlando.
Okay.
What is it with Orlando? He's like a demigod there. They piped his music into the
It's all of
SeaWorld.
Florida.
Is it really?
Yeah, he I don't know if it's still going on, but back when I was still living there, he lives in the Keys, and he'll just go to bars in the Keys and play like acoustic guitar sets.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, especially like early 2000s, he would just you just see him. He's just out and about.
That was
He's a god walking among the people.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That was like, I don't know, That was like Elvis in the early '80s in Vegas. You know, he had just died, and there were shrines. You could get Elvis stuff in almost any store. You go to a gas station, you could buy Elvis T-shirts, and that's what it seemed like. It's like that. Jimmy Buffett is the patron demigod of Florida. At least that's the way it looked.
I keep on thinking of Jimmy Dean, which I know is not the same.
No,
I am aware of this. Like, it's awful hot for all that sausage.
All right. Oh, I haven't mentioned it all. My book, if you want to get my book, it's on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle, or you can get the print-on-demand version of it. And I have a bunch of these. Maybe I'll come up with some kind of contest, and I'll send a few signed ones out to people who win something. I'll have to figure out what to do with them. It's called Mandite and the Apprentice Mage. And the second book is written, and the third book I just finished last night.
Wow.
I wrote the third book in 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Like Mozart. Jesus fuck.
Yeah.
I figured out how to outline novels. At least how I need to outline novels. And now that I know how to do it, it's like, oh, okay, there's my story. I'm glad my dad made me take typing. Because I can type almost as fast as I can think. I bet you I'm probably getting back, because at one time I got clocked at almost 90 words a minute. And I'm probably getting close to that again, because I'm doing so much typing now. My knuckles hurt.
I don't even know what good is anymore. I had to take a class in high school where we had to learn to type, and then I went into graphic design, and it's like I use a claw, and that's about all I need for the keyboard. I don't have to type shit.
You just have to be a little group of your shortcuts that you use in Adobe programs. That's the only things you touch.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took it. My dad made me take it in junior high school, and he had a lot of foresight about that, because he told me, and this is, God, what, 78? He's like, one day everyone's going to be using a computer at work. Whatever job you have, at some point you're going to need to work on a computer keyboard. And I'm like, oh, that's not true. You don't know what you're talking about. I was a teenager. Parents aren't right. And then he made me take. He actually made all my sisters take it too. And I'm like, I don't want to take typing. So, but I ended up taking it, and thank God I did, because I could type circles around. So anyway,
I think the fastest I could ever type was AIM chats when you're managing like 5 at a time.
See, I can't do
that's
that
dating
because
me. That's the thing that dates me.
I always send the wrong message to the wrong people because I don't pay attention, because I have a deficiency of attention.
Of attention.
Yeah.
all right. Anything else anyone wants to mention, plug, discuss, anything? Going once?
I can plug my game that I'm running.
Plug the game you're
every other Monday, starting this coming Monday and 3 days from now, you can come watch me run Lighthearted with Kadave, Joe, Clara, and Claire. I got to enunciate so that you know those are different people. But yeah, you can come see our actual play of Lighthearted that's going to run for like 6 months. And then if you like the game, you can go buy it at lighthearted.games.
Oh, there's a .games now?
Yeah.
Really?
Freaking love that.
Are they expensive or the cheap, the domains?
Super cheap. Top level domains are real good.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? Going once, going twice? Okay. I will send it out. Thank you for joining us for season 27, episode 8 of Happy Jack's RPG podcast. My name is Stu.
This is Happy.
This is 7 Jess.
And I'm Kurt.
And we'll see you next week, 7 p.m. Pacific time, right here, happyjacks.org/live. And until then, stay safe, keep playing games, and that's it. Bye.
presentation of the Angry Folk Media Empire.
Why problem make when you no problem have you don't want to make?